Well, hello, and I was going to say good afternoon because I'm in London and it is the afternoon, except of course in the United States, Canada, and other parts of the Americas, it's now either the middle of the day or it's the morning. So good morning and hello, welcome to this webinar with Container Solutions and our very special guest, James Waters from VMware. James, hello there.
Hey, good morning. Great to be here. Hi from San Francisco.
Pleasure to have you, mate. I can see, are you actually in an office there or are you on virtual?
That's a virtual rendition of our Palo Alto office, which is, I think, one of the best campuses in the world in terms of its overall vibe and location, and I miss it. So I put that up to remind me that better days lie ahead.
Well, they certainly don't lie behind us, that's for sure. So for those of you who are new to our webinars, let me take you over the format. We usually do about 15 to 20 minutes introductions, industry gossip, announcements from across the industry, but also from Container Solutions. Believe it or not, most people love the opening 16 or 17 minutes. But if you want to grab a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, or if you're dialing in from Germany or the Netherlands, which many people will be dialing in from, feel free to grab a beer or a glass of wine. Once we've got us through all those different announcements, we will then bring in James, who's the main event today. We have been trialing something different, which is we've asked people when they've registered for the webinar to ask their questions in advance. And we've got lots of good questions. This doesn't mean you can't grab the mic and ask questions later, you can. What it does mean is we know for sure we're going to have a really interactive and in-depth conversation at the end. So without further ado, the first thing we need to do, actually, I'll do something special, I'll do something extra. There's a lot of people from VMware here today in the webinar. So we wanted to give a big Container Solutions shout out to everybody from VMware. You have a massive company, right? And that's what we've discovered in working with VMware and doing this go-to-market work with you. So for me, as the founder of Container Solutions, to all of you, big welcome. It's good to have you here. And for sure, we hope to see a lot of you again when we're doing a different webinar that doesn't have one of your peeps in. So welcome and thanks for all the help and support putting this together. The second shout out has got to go to our own marketing team. We pulled out all the stops. We've been tweeting, we've been sharing on LinkedIn, and a stupid video with me doing an impression of Robocop changed or turned into an actual message from the actual Robocop. For those of you who are my age, that's over 40, you will remember Robocop, the original from the, or help me out, James, 80s, 90s?
1987.
I was going to say that's late 80s by my recollection. Late 80s.
Late 80s, directed by Paul Verhoeven, Dutch director. Brilliant film. You should definitely watch it. The new one's a bit pants. Well, anyway, we got a message from the actual Robocop. Teresa's going to share that link right now in the chat box so you can take a look at that later. Not much point retweeting it because the event's already happening. Right. Before we move any further, a tiny bit of housekeeping. This concerns the code of conduct. Container Solutions and all the events that we attend and we run are a safe place for people, regardless of their ethnicity, gender, sexuality. We have a code of conduct. You will adhere to it or you will be thrown out of the webinar. It's very simple and you will never return. If you would like to read more about our code of conduct, we have a long form version on the website. Teresa will now share the link. If you are running events and you're a smaller company than we are and you need a code of conduct, please feel free to take from it, steal from it, or even ask us questions in a private message and we'll help you sort of piece that together. All of us need to be the change we want to see in our industry, inclusive and open. I didn't mean to sound threatening then. I've never sounded so threatening on the code of conduct bit before. I think it was all that memories of Robocop. That's it for the housekeeping. Did I miss anything, Carla?
We are recording the webinar. And if you have any issues, we can blur your name or your face. You can let us know in the chat as well.
Exactly. We are recording the, thanks, Carla. I always forget that one. We are recording because lots of people like to watch these videos back in a different time zone, especially now we're all working asynchronously. If you've got an issue with your face appearing, let us know. We'll blare you out. If you've got an issue with the recording, we're kind of sorry. You probably have to drop off or drop off and actually watch the recording yourself later. So what are we going to be doing? Housekeeping. We've done that. Check. A load of announcements. This is a cool bit, a little bit cool. And then my favorite section, what is the gossip? And for the gossip today, we are joined by Ian Mile. Are you on the line? This is live TV.
Yes.
Oh, he's here.
Desperately. I wasn't expecting to have to hit mute. Yes, I'm here.
Very welcome. Ian Mile is my colleague in the London office. We do lots of cool things together, sometimes about GitOps, often about consulting. Mainly it's about drinking beer on a Friday afternoon. How are things with you, Ian?
Good, thank you. Yeah, missing the beer.
Yes, I'm missing you, mate. I've got no friends. And of course, we've got the wonderful Leanne Lee. Hello, Leanne. How are you this evening?
I am good. I have wine. Cheers.
Of course. She's in the Netherlands. She's on the continent.
It's so late here already.
Enjoy. And finally, we've got Adrian Moat dialing in from Edinburgh to share a bit of gossip with us as well. Adrian, how are you doing?
I'm good. I wasn't planning to share gossip, but I am here.
Okay, that's fine.
Leanne's taking my place.
To the gossip section, so thanks for the heads up. Right, fine. Okay, moving along nicely. You can subscribe to. Oh, sorry, we've swore. I'm really sorry, everybody. Don't look at the WTF. You can sign up to our newsletter, WTF Cloud Native. Videos, blogs, infographics. It's completely awesome. You don't even get spammed by our marketing team. Just click the box that says you don't care about being on the marketing lists. You'll never get a single email from us, apart from the newsletter that you're signing up for. I wrote a book once. Book's awesome. 25 reviews on Amazon. It's just a coincidence that I've got 25 cousins. But the book's awesome, and it's a proper sort of manual for doing cloud native properly. You can get that for free. All of the book is available somewhere. There's a patterns website, there's a blog, there's a PDF extract. It was already for free. You don't need to buy it, but now you can download it for free. Happy to take questions about that, but this is the way we do cloud native transformation. This is what our whole existence is about. And of course, James later is going to give he's going to give us his experiences in cloud native transformation as well. Follow the link in the chat. We are going to be talking about the book because we've just made it free. That's me and my best mate, Pinny. You can sign up. That's our next webinar. And by the way, we're hiring in London. So James, tell all your mates from Pivotal, if you like, or from VMware. Oh, no, not from VMware. No, what? I retract that statement. If you know anybody in London who's looking for a job, let them know, because we're building a pretty kick-ass sales team. Okay, gossip. Who's going first? Is it you, Ian, or is it you, Leanne?
It's me. I need to jump to another meeting, so I just went first. My gossip story of today, and I thought about this title all by myself, by the way. It's when technical debt turns into technical death. This was a story that was posted 2 days ago on Reddit. Am I allowed to swear in here, by the way? Because there's a lot of sweary words in that story.
We've got a lot of people from the US in, and
okay.
Probably don't
no
swear.
swearing then. Okay. Well, this is a user called UOS expletive F expletive. Apparently, his company decided at some point, or their company, I don't know if this is what gender they are, they built a custom DNS system into their custom ERP software. Brackets don't ask, so I won't. They tried to get rid of this for years. It was awful, obviously. Then one day, last Friday, apparently, it all broke down. All domain information was wiped out and records became null. They go on to say, our backups are expletive. Our records are wiped from all domain servers out there. The company basically doesn't exist anymore. We don't even know what domains we own. Listings were hosted on the ERP. Also, their AD broke, no email, no messaging apps, nothing. They don't have a listing of all their 300 employees working remotely, so they can't even call them to let them know that nothing works anymore. And finally, they say, what the F should we do now? I have a 3 months resignation period, so I can't even leave and let the boat sink. So yeah, that's, like if you have technical debt, take care of it before it turns into your company destroying catastrophe that you can't come back from, because I mean, I'm sure there are ways to get some information back, but I mean, I don't even know how all records were wiped from all domain servers in the entire world. I don't even know how they managed that. But yeah.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Right, Ian, what have you got for us?
So the first story is about Backblaze backtrack on Facebook file name Furore. So what happened was someone was backing up some stuff to Backblaze, and they found there was a bit of a delay, and they dug into the web debugging and found that the file name information about the files they were backing up were being sent to Facebook. So they were there was a bit of consternation about this, and then they found out that this was due to the Facebook Pixel feature, which a bit like Google Analytics, a bit of JavaScript you dump in your website and forget about it. Turns out it doesn't. It sends far more information than Backblaze were comfortable with. So as soon as they found out, they backtracked. But I found this story funny because I used to work for a sort of retail type company, and we were always being fixing bugs with these sort of JavaScript tracking, and always being pressured to put these sort of JavaScript tracking pieces into the site. And so it's really easy to basically hand over your crown jewels of data to another company, thinking, well, you know, it's a big company, what are they going to do that's so bad? And it also engendered a lot of interesting discussion that I saw about, you know, are file names secret data? And the answer is, of course, yes. Very, very often it's considered highly confidential information. So, you know, there is a huge kind of question mark about every company's approach to security management there. So that was one. I think the links are going to be put into the chat if you want to dig further into that. And the other story that I thought was really interesting was, I'm sure many of you read about the $69 million sale of a non-fungible token around an artwork by an artist called Beeple. There's a great article about this, which basically dug into the ownership of that particular NFT and found that the artist himself had a 2% stake in the token company, the crypto company that bought the artwork. The buyer of the artwork himself owns this said token company, owns 59% of it. And how he paid for this is not entirely clear either. So essentially the whole thing stinks a bit. The entrepreneur himself who bought it has a colorful past with various businesses in various states of repair and various fraud accusations, various aliases. And this was all disputed by him to the author of this article, but he didn't actually come up with anything that the author said that was wrong. So
Ian, for those people joining us who might not know, what are NFTs?
Oh, sorry, yes. So non-fungible tokens are a means of proving ownership of something. So they're a kind of a blockchain type concept. And essentially you pay for this non-fungible token, and then you own the thing it's associated with. I don't know the technical detail much more than that, but it's something to do with digital provenance. So you basically pay for something, you get ownership of this NFT, and that relates back to the thing that you supposedly own. In this case, it's a JPEG. So there's a whole bunch of other questions about whether what that even means, and then that engenders potentially a whole load of other interesting debates about the philosophy of owning things that are intangible or directly reproducible, which you can have, of course, about paintings and other artworks anyway. And the whole area of provenance in artwork is fascinating, but that's a subject for another day.
So another webinar and another week of madness in the world of technology and cloud native. We somehow manage to dig these stories up every 4 or 5 days, right?
Yeah, there's plenty of them.
Okay, well, on that note, I'd like to thank Leanne and I'd like to thank you, Ian, for coming in and giving us an update on the gossip. There's a bit of chatter and some links being shared right now in the Zoom Hangout. We're only 1 minute away from introducing James. Let me just give a bit of a recap, and it's especially important for those people who are new to our webinars. Everything we do is about trying to explain what cloud native is. So the last time we were here together, we were talking about SRE and DevOps. This is in the team area. Oh, and by the way, we are running an SRE conference in a few weeks. It's already absolutely full and it's completely free. And that was based on the last webinar we did. So, sign up for that if you're interested. But another time we had Dr. Holly Cummins here speaking about collaboration and culture. So every time we meet, we talk about a different element of the maturity matrix. Well, today is going to be something slightly different because we're going to be talking about transformation. How do you move the needle on one or more of these elements at any given point? There are best practices and there are known pitfalls. And it's these different case studies and these different ways of becoming cloud native that James is going to be speaking about today. And James, I'm right in saying that you've got no slides, you're just here to speak and to do storytelling.
It seemed more interesting to me, Jamie and team. I used to do a I was explaining to you before, kind of a watering hole kind of discussion format that we do Sunday nights late at night. And only the most aficionado of the cloud natives would come out for the Sunday night discussions. But that's always where we found our truth and our kind of center, if you will. Like whatever was worth talking about with that crew was sort of what was happening. So I was hoping we could do something more like that kind of aficionado conversation today than a standard marketing boilerplate. But I can switch to slides right now if you like.
No, absolutely not. We're happy to do the dialogue. Do you want people coming in with questions in real time, or do you want to take the questions at the end?
I'm happy to keep it real time. Let's let this be an emergent property of our discussion where it goes.
Absolutely. So everybody feel free to unmic yourself if you're comfortable, switch your video on and just come in with questions and discussions with James all the way through this. I will moderate as best I can, but really, if it's respectful, anything goes. It's on that note then that I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves and give a very warm Container Solutions welcome to James Waters from VMware. Welcome, James.
Very, very kind. Very, very kind. So I'll follow your lead, Jamie. Let's wherever we want to take this.
Well, I think we need to start with transformation, James, because that's what we talked about. And I think what most people would want to know is what are the patterns you see? And I guess what are the failure modes and how does this go wrong?
Yeah, I think, a little background in my perspective is that there's been a couple of generations of what you might call the cloud developer experience that we've been working on. And I think there's the cloud infrastructure experience and there's sort of the cloud developer experience. And those have been kind of marching along in parallel but linked paths. And there's been a transformation of application patterns over the years. I think the most important first mover in that was really Netflix as they moved from a monolithic Java on-prem to microservices Java in the cloud. I still think that Adrian Cockcroft, who I got the term cloud native from, I first heard cloud native discussed really as a thing at Lobby Conference in about 2014 on the beach. And Alex Polvey, if you ever heard of Lobby Conference, this little speakeasy on the beach in Maui, and Alex Polvey was holding a beanbag session. And I watched a CTO of Home Depot, a friend of mine, Paul Gaffney, and Alex kind of going, hey, we could do a cloud native enterprise. And we started saying like, okay, where's Paul and Alex going with this? And I think what was happening is we were starting to see Adrian Cockcroft championing like just giving people infrastructure APIs and distributed application patterns as the default and seeing how fast they could go. And if you just riffing with you, at the time, it wasn't clear that Netflix was even going to survive, right? Like they really had to be a velocity first business. And now they're worth what, X, 100 billions. Yeah. That was the time in which there was days where Netflix would trade down to like, oh, they're going out of business.
Yeah.
So But I remember watching in the sense of storytelling, I remember watching Alex and Paul Gaffney talking about that in 2014 and thinking, we've really got to nail this on two fronts. One, what is this new application pattern? And I thought Netflix has started to articulate that in terms of microservices. And that is by far the most popular of the application patterns that came out of the last decade. And then two is the next year is really when Kubernetes came full force onto the market as that cloud native infrastructure and started to be, you know, kind of the default there. So I think we've been in this march to transform what declarative infrastructure and scalable application patterns look like ever since. And we've sort of been fine tuning it. So just set the high level for me, like we've been on that march since about 2014, I think, after Netflix's success on Amazon and just sort of figuring it out. And frankly, Adrian was the first one that really said cloud native. Like he was talking about cloud native as an app pattern and as an infrastructure pattern. And I think we've all been marching behind him. I don't know if that makes sense to Ian. Has also been on this one for a long time. That's a little history for me.
Yeah. Ian, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's the whole area of transformation is something I've been interested in since I worked at a large organization that tried to transform. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of areas that could be covered there. But it's interesting that Netflix did so well because they were starting from a blank slate, really. Where I'm really interested in is how companies that don't start from a blank slate move towards that kind of highly agile way of working. And I'm wondering.
Yeah, it's funny you should say that about Netflix though, because actually it was a database outage, wasn't it, that triggered them to become an AWS customer. That was actually in 2006. And then I think that was more or less when Cockcroft arrived. And then they started to transform and become what would later be microservices, programmable infrastructure. So I can't imagine Netflix transformation was as epic as what we might do in a large bank. But there was a transformation. And reading between the lines, their tech stack sounded like it was a right mess.
But that's really interesting though, isn't it? Because it's an existential event. And it's always an existential event that triggers real change. And when you're a huge company, there aren't existential events unless you're right at the top and you're looking at, you know, strategically 10 years with toast. Most people are just carrying on as they are and they don't feel a need to change. And that's what I find so fascinating is how do you instill change in those people?
Let me bring you in there, James. Let me ask James that question, because what we've noticed in our work and the research for the books is cloud native transformation doesn't usually happen unless there is that existential threat. And we're wondering, have you seen any transformations where there wasn't such a threat?
I think two things happen, Jamie. Number one is you've got a top tier company that's committed to remaining top tier. So they're willing to fund staying number one. And one of the largest banks in the world actually was one of the first places we started taking some of these cloud native ideas. And we actually went into that very, very large at scale bank and said, do you want to stay number one? We think we could help you adopt a modern microservices set of patterns and run it on a container environment for you. That bank today runs 250,000 plus containers in production using the Netflix style of microservices. And, you know, I was super impressed. Like even back in 2015, one of their first demos of a container and microservices platform included chaos testing. Yeah. So I think it's very possible because number one, they were committed to staying number one. And I think where you get into trouble is you kind of get in this middle spot of people that aren't existentially threatened and they're not committed to staying number one, right? And then you're sort of coming in with the, hey, don't you want to go fast motivation? But we have seen that Adrian Cockcroft kind of microservices Java in a container, you know, declarative infrastructure pattern work at mega scale with Tanzu. I mean, that's a Tanzu client running 250,000 containers. And then we've also seen organizations that do feel existentially threatened, and I think they start to adopt kind of that pattern. So I'm actually very hopeful about it. But the thing that I want to say, Jamie, is I do think that application pattern as well as the infrastructure pattern working together is critical. Yeah. And the people that have actually tried to do like just, infrastructure transformation or just do something at the infrastructure level and haven't changed anything on application architecture or application culture, that to me is missing the original play of cloud native and what Adrian is up to, and why I anchor in that as an example. Like it really, Netflix didn't go to EC2 with their Oracle WebLogic app. Like that's not what the harangue was about. But the average cloud salesperson today is compensated only on the amount of, infrastructure you consume. And so actually the way cloud go-to-market works today is much more focused on just get whatever you got out of your data center into their rental VM. And I think that's where we might have lost a play on transformation, because that's sort of a fad diet, in my opinion.
Well, it's what that, and that's of course the difference between cloud and cloud native, isn't it?
That's right.
The cloud providers, like the electricity companies, want your applications to be power hungry or compute hungry, because that's how they're going to get monetized.
Yeah, and I think just put that out there, like that's where I'm super happy to be part of this conversation and talk about what cloud native is, because I don't really like that sales-driven architecture of just get your workload in my data center for rent as what cloud's about. That's not exciting as a mission for me around changing the world with software.
Yeah, it's a bit like cloud version 1, isn't it? I mean, that's a very myopic view. Get your stuff on our tin, take your servers from your basement, put them on our servers in the desert. We'll charge you every month, flip CapEx to OpEx, but it's boring. It's really boring. And actually, I think what we see with our customers, and I'd love to see what Ian thinks, our customers are not trying to save $1 million here or there nowadays on costs. They're trying to capture billion-dollar value opportunities. That's the difference. Cloud is a rental computer. Cloud native is a system of innovation.
I think it's easy to underestimate, though, the amount of change that's required just to do that kind of lift and shift cloud movement into the cloud. Although it's not where we want to be with our customers. If you can get something related on this subject is if you can get the cost model right, i.e. charge back to the particular development teams the costs of their infrastructure and their applications, then you lay the foundations for a fuller transformation. And that's a huge challenge for a lot of organizations, and many of them never get there, even if they do a cloud native transformation. So I kind of have a slightly more forgiving view of that lift and shift approach as a first step, because it comes with all these other organizational changes that have to take place in order for you to make those.
But you make a great point, right? Because if you can create a feedback loop through the cost to the people developing on it, then naturally the way to drive down cost is to innovate on your application pattern, which is of course the point James was making earlier.
And that's the real challenge with a lot of these transformations, is actually getting the accountability to the teams for the costs. You can't do it if you own a data center because the cost is sunk. Whereas if the cost is OpEx, you can actually say your application costs X. Can you justify that? But that's really, really hard for a lot of organizations to do, because they're built on a completely different cost model.
Yeah. Now, James, we've got questions coming in from the audience. It's like we're sticking with cloud native.
Yeah.
But I think it's to do with the last couple of years. And the question is, what are your biggest takeaways from your experience with Cloud Foundry? And is there anything that you think the cloud native and the Kubernetes community can pick up and learn from that?
Yeah, I've kind of had the pleasure of watching 3 really important communities evolve together. The first one is the Java community and what was happening there. And that's where I went back to Netflix and talked about, one of the cool things in Tanzu, like to the thing, what is Tanzu? Like one of the most powerful communities within Tanzu is actually the microservices Java community with Spring Boot. So if you talk to almost any of these banks, I believe Ian, the bank you used to hang out at, had some Spring Boot. The one I talked to at Scale uses Spring Boot. Netflix is standardized on Spring Boot. They all have in common this evolutionary perspective on Java, where you can still hire all the Java developers you had, but put them to work on cloud apps. And it's as simple as that, right? Like they can have an evolutionary step to that. So been watching that evolve has been very powerful, and that's become a really ubiquitous technology. And we can talk a little bit about that. And I would actually say that's probably one of the biggest keys I've seen to transformation, is getting that application architecture set. It doesn't have to be Spring Boot, Jamie, but like That's just like, here's what I see. We have accounts where you have Cloud Foundry and Spring Boot, or just a container as a service by itself. The organization has both the developer experience for containers as well as an application target architecture for cloud apps, usually outconsumes by 2 orders of magnitude just a raw infrastructure change that's unrelated to the higher levels. Like if I can just share one truth of the last decade, it's like putting those 3 things together, a target application pattern, a developer experience on Kubernetes and Kubernetes together, that's the magic. One of those alone is going to be more fraught. And so the interesting thing with Cloud Foundry is we really nailed the Spring Boot plus cloud developer experience and containers platform. And then the question was always like, yeah, but how do I extend that? Like, how do I add another arbitrary system to that pod? How do I add Elasticsearch? How do I add an Azure service? And we had the open service broker, but I'm really excited about the work coming out of the Kubernetes community around operators right now. And Tanzu's got some really interesting opinions. And as we re-swizzle Cloud Foundry to be Kubernetes oriented, I think we can get that right. That modern Java app experience, the developer experience on Kubernetes, as well as how you federate and broker into these other points of extension. I think that was really the question. So we just saw a lot more consumption though in that experience of getting the DevX experience right on Kubernetes. And I'd be curious what you think of that. Like how often do you focus on that? Because what we see is that maybe 1 or 2 teams out of 10 in a big enterprise can just use Kubernetes as it exists. Other teams, they need a little bit additional scaffolding, like a Knative++, to really be productive. And I think that's where we are as an evolution in the industry, right?
I mean, it's funny you should say that. Talk about evolution Java and how do we do it?
Yeah.
We are the authors. I don't know if you've heard of it. We're the authors of the Java operator SDK. And that's because we were working in finance with this big Java landscape. And actually they wanted to move to Kubernetes and we needed to create a load of operators. Yeah. And at the end, we were doing so much of that. We ended up writing the SDK specifically for Java operators. So definitely we see you do need a way to bridge it. It's what you said. You need those 3 things: Kubernetes, the developer experience, and the application architecture.
Yeah.
Also, Jamie, we're getting very involved in this whole concept of the internal developer platform, which is basically similar to what you're talking about, James, that you can't, there are a few teams that will just pick up everything by themselves, but the rest need a railway to get there. And that railway is often built.
Was Cloud Foundry the railway version 1? And is Tanzu a more modern platforms version 2? Is there a progression there?
That's the unfair advantage I think we have, Jamie, that I humbly am just happy to work on every day with Tanzu, is we have all 3 of those pieces, right? We have the creators of Kubernetes, and we have a ubiquitous vSphere substrate and a ubiquitous hybrid cloud management system to really take Kubernetes and pave the earth with Kubernetes, as Craig McCluskey says. Like, we're going to put Kubernetes and we're going to operate it declaratively with Cluster API versus like, hey, Ansible and Hope. Which I know Ian's been down the road on, so I won't pick on him for that. But I think actually declarative operations of Kubernetes, like that seems like first principle common sense to me. And I think a lot of people didn't quite get that right, which was an impedance mismatch in the operating model. So we're going to declaratively cover the earth with Kubernetes first, but we've got this really great estate of Cloud Foundry customers that are very happy and that they really deeply believe in DevX on containers too. And we're evolving that with the Knative community into a modern experience on Kubernetes. And that's really, really very exciting and necessary, I think. So stay tuned there. And then of course, the Spring community and some of the other application oriented technologies we have. Those 3 things are, I think, really, really critical and what's exciting about Tanzu versus maybe some other ideas out there. I don't know if that answered your question.
I can't remember the question. It doesn't matter. I think it does. Yeah. The question was about how did Cloud Foundry, how will it affect the Kubernetes and Cloud Native company?
I think that bringing the Cloud Foundry-like experience to Kubernetes with Knative and with Deep Spring integration is the exciting turn we're on right now.
Right. So we've got a very practical question coming in from the audience now. When we move to platforms, whether it's using Kubernetes or something as powerful as Tanzu, the customer often has to do a lot of integration. How do you get around that in terms of helping your customers integrate or migrate? And how do you set expectations with top management?
I think You know, let me take a step back in terms of integration. I think even before you get to that, are you treating, and this is a conversation I had over beers with Ian a long time ago, are you really able to treat your Kubernetes clusters as cattle? Are you really able to deploy and configure and upgrade them declaratively? Because the pattern I see, Jamie, and I'm sure you and Ian have perspectives. I've been on calls with maybe 5 or 10 CIOs the last 3 weeks. And they're like, oh my gosh, we let every little team run off and do Kubernetes their own way. And now all of the policies, the configuration, they're all snowflakes. And I remember a conversation with Ian about snowflake clusters. So even before you get to all those integrations, like the problem that I see it as today is like everyone doing a DIY configuration of their own cluster in their own way versus saying we have an engine to really stamp out clusters, upgrade clusters in a repeatable fashion. Because then you'd be integrating into it 10 different ways versus one way. You know, we're certainly working on these operator-like integration interfaces, and that's evolving, that's exciting. But I think just clusters as cattle as the first step to even being programmatic is critical. Is that something Container Solutions sees the need for as well?
Well, this is one of there's a few key reasons why people pick up the phone and call us, and one of the main reasons is CIOs are like, there's too many Kubernetes everywhere.
Exactly.
And we're like, okay, good. And this is why we have a very small sales team, is because usually customers find us. Send those CIOs our way. Ian, what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's something I've wanted ever since I started using Kubernetes was, you know, it's a first-class object, and you should be able to just magic them into existence, just like an EC2 instance on AWS. And for a long time, I don't know why, but for a long time we didn't get this as an industry. And way after I was, my job at this large company was dealing with chef recipes, and yeah, it's crazy. You just want another one of these things, which should be the same as all the other things. And we're getting the act together now, but it's been a long time. I don't know why it's been quite so long. I guess nobody wants to pay for it or something, but you know.
Right. So here's a curveball I'm going to throw at you, and I'd love to know what you think. There is an argument that Kubernetes clusters and automation in all different ways all around an organization is the first step to cloud native migration, because at least everybody knows what a YAML file looks like and knows what a container looks like. So Andy Grove, the former Intel CEO, would always say, let chaos reign before reigning in chaos. So this is a well-known pattern in enterprise transformation. What do we think about that? Crazy?
Is that for me or James?
Anybody who's brave enough to take it, you both look shocked.
I think innovation is messy, and I do think that there is value in learning organizations, and sometimes chaos can allow people to learn in, you know, non-synchronized cadence asynchronously, which is great, right? Like we all learn at our own pace in our own way, and I think that's good. The other thing I fiercely believe, though, is at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a pure technical win, right? Like you have to find the value line of your system. You're like, otherwise you lose the reason you're all collaborating, right? Like, why are we all collaborating? It's not just to do technical things. It's to achieve outcomes, and it's to find value for the business. And so I think, you know, we could all go off and write our own drivers for Linux to learn about Linux as well. So I think there's limits to that argument, Jamie. And I do think that ultimately end-to-end throughput in terms of efficiency for the business and development is a critical metric. And so I try to help CIOs find that value line. And as I talked about, those three things that go together really are how you get there. I do think it's great to let people learn, of course, but it might not be a strategy.
I think the question is, what's the most cost-effective way? I mean, we helped a number of large banks, and I'm going back 10 or 12 years now. So this is pre-cloud native, more DevOpsy work.
Yeah.
And honestly, they had basically loosened organizational constraints and let people play. And they distinctly were going to start tightening that back up after, let's say, 9 to 12 months. More centralized patterns, more scripts that people could reuse. But they were trying to, through experimentation, upskill the organization and let people play. you do make a good point, because just coming back to Andy Grove, I only know this because I happen to be working on a chapter for something I'm working on. He also had a problem with people at Intel. Techies tend to become unfocused, and if they've got time, they go and do something that's good for their curiosity and not necessarily good for the business. So the proliferation of clusters is also part, of the natural desire of people, and yes, it can lead to chaos for sure.
Can I ask a question there?
Of course, absolutely, coming in.
Does it also depend on who you're talking to, if they really want you to solve this problem with, clusters as cattle? Because I mean, there's a whole class of DevOps architects out there, and there's a huge Kubernetes ecosystem, and perhaps they want to tweak around. And so does the CIO always make the best decision there? Is that the struggle?
I think hey, how good to see
Hi.
you, Twitter friend. My take is that it's not just about selling DevOps tools at the end of the day, right? Like, I think the DevOps community has to stick to its own Hippocratic oath, which is that first do no harm and help if you can. And sometimes what I see is DevOps tools for their own sake, like, oh, if you just reapplied this DevOps tool to everything you do, therefore you're now DevOpsy. And I think that's sort of a dangerous infinite loop of resource consumption, if you will. So avoiding that with an exponential back off to value creation, I think, is the only way out of keeping that from flapping. Sorry, just to use a metaphor here. And I think that's also why it was weird to me that people are like, oh, use this random DevOps tool to deploy Kubernetes as the primary use case. Like, I think that's weird. Like, why wouldn't you want it to be what Ian said, which is its own first class object with its own kind of declarative system to instantiate it? And then why wouldn't you want applications that are ready to be declaratively automated on top of it? Like, those two things make sense. I think doing, random DevOps tools to stand up, very difficult to model applications, that seems really hard. And, the creators of Berkshire Hathaway, which is the most successful investment company in the world, had this nice saying, which is, in investing, there are no points for degree of difficulty, right? Like, just because we pull off an investment that was really hard to see, and then we made a 10% gain, that's the same 10% gain from an easy investment. And I think that applies to a lot of this cloud native work, is that sometimes people are tempted to take on the most technically challenging thing to get a 10% gain, when actually something that's simple for a 10% gain pays off the same. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of giving you some of my perspective.
James, do you think that's because people don't know what they're doing? Or do you think it's a mixture of innovating on the company's dime?
I think it's just, like, honestly, the thing I've learned over time is one of the hardest things to do is to get people to talk. And if you're only solving at your own Snowflake cluster level, you actually don't have to talk to anyone else. You can configure it however you want within your domain. And if you say, well, now you've got to talk to the pipeline team about the DevX, and you've got to talk to the LOB around the application patterns, that's a lot more conversations, and humans are a little solitary cognitively. And so when you get these smart people all in a big organization, actually just getting them to talk about that end to end, that's where leadership can really unlock the value, I think. And that, to me, is the hard part about transformation.
So I'll tell you a funny story. You're in one of our events right now. Great marketing team at Container Solutions. Great events team, great organizers. Now, where did it come from, this team? Well, when we started out 7 years ago, we were doing, actually, we were working on Apache Mesos. Remember that?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. So we were like, okay, we're going to go into these, like me and Pinny, a few engineers, not
just
many.
Teasing to the Mesos fans, just teasing.
They're used to that by now. Don't worry about it. So we started selling our services. We'd never been salespeople before, but we gave it a crack, and here we are today. So we start to do what we now call cloud native, and then all of a sudden you think, wait a minute, that team over there is not speaking to that team over there. So we had to bring them together. And we started doing open space conferences within large organizations. And people were like, aren't you the container people? And we were like, yeah, but we can't do our jobs unless we get people talking. Then we started printing mugs with commands on and mouse mats to try to get people to understand what cloud native is. And then we brought in all hands, and I had to cajole the executives to come in and say, this is the importance of this initiative. So by accident, we became really good at organizing events and conferences. And that storytelling part of cloud native transformation is still with us today. But we did not start out to solve communication problems in enterprises.
I mean, you ask the engineering leaders privately over a beer of these big famous companies that can hire whoever they want. And you say, what's your big issue? It's getting team alignment. First step, hire a lot of smart people. Step 2, align smart people. Now you're talking real leadership challenge. And that's at the biggest, baddest, most capable companies in the world. You'll find that that is one of their big challenges, I think. But that's why I think it's great that you're out there advocating for what cloud native is, what it means, and why I try to talk about those 3 points of alignment is so people leaders are clear what they're really trying to accomplish.
Yeah. So it's unbelievable. I'm looking at the index of the book right now. The pattern categories, the cloud native transformation patterns are divided into 4. Organization and culture is one of them. Strategy, risk reduction is the other. Development and processes and practices a third. And the last one is infrastructure and cloud. And there are less patterns in that category than any other category by a mile.
Smart book.
Oh, I don't know. I didn't mean to. I've got it next to me because I was plugging it earlier. But the point is that if you think cloud native is containers and Kubernetes, you're fucking kidding yourself. I've sworn now. You've made me swear. You're absolutely fooling yourself if you think cloud native is about a Java app in a container on a cluster in a cloud. And then the same people who convince themselves of that scratch their heads. Where's the innovation?
Yeah, look, I think just to riff for a second, I mean, Kubernetes did a remarkable thing, which it's turned infrastructure into a declarative first-class object everywhere you want to go. If you think back to the bad old days of DevOps in 2013, using a chef script on EC2, you might have had 40% of the EC2 VMs never come alive, and you had to hand curate all of that. So we were really, really far from declarative automation back then. And so it's a remarkable technology that's totally advanced the industry. It's built a remarkable ecosystem and it's incredible, but it doesn't solve every problem, right? It solves a very specific set of problems that we're super excited about, but I think also keeping the eye on the prize of the other problems is just essential. So glad your book does that.
I'm sorry, I feel guilty now for plugging the book. I wanted to, anyway, that's fine. Right, now let's get back. I've got a list of questions that were pre-rolled as part of the login or the registration process. But whilst I'm digging up the next one, is there anybody on the webinar who wants to unmute themselves and ask a question directly to James?
Well, I have a book. I bought a book. Can I have it signed?
Yes, of course. Any questions? I'm sorry, I was not expecting that. Any questions for James? Otherwise, I can move on to the next one.
Yeah, I have some questions for James and for anyone else. So I'm Barbara from VMware Digital Transformation and 25 plus years working across an enterprise, trying to align people, process, and capabilities. In joining VMware, it's the first time I've actually been non-objective read technology, or so the perception. And so I guess one of the key questions I have is, in these larger organizations that we talk about where the executive are actually incented in the silos, in other words, keeping the behaviors the same, keeping the operating model the same, keeping the support model the same, how do we transition and get those people into a room in order to understand the domains of control that they're being incented on versus the spheres of influence where we are trying to align people and trying to work with behaviors to get people to cross-communicate across things like cloud app modernization beyond the infrastructure. This is what I deal with every day and have for the last 25 years. And it's a challenge when fundamentally the leadership is incented in those silos.
It's an absolute business problem. Now, Barbara, first of all, let me say welcome. It's good to have you here this evening, or
Thank you.
This afternoon where you are.
I'm in Toronto. It's morning. It's afternoon.
Which one, morning or afternoon?
It's afternoon.
Okay, we've also got another Canadian on the line, our CTO, Ian Crosby. He's not in Toronto. But hey, hello, Adrian, there's a Canadian.
Yeah, I'm a Canadian. Who is it? Adrian?
Ian Crosby. You need
Ian
to.
Crosby.
We must know each other, right?
We don't know each other, but we will. Okay. And
Now,
I want the book. I want the book.
It's coming, I promise. Right. Now let's have.
Oh, you haven't delivered. Oh, okay.
I promise we're going to answer the question. At least James is going to answer it. One more question for you. Do you know James?
No.
Exactly.
I know. We're connected on LinkedIn. I don't know James. I've only been 2 years in VMware. And I'm like, all right, him and I, we need to have a conversation.
Right, James, over to you.
Yeah.
You know, I think our leader Raghu of VMware, our kind of COO, he says like the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And I think that's the challenge of cloud native too, which is in some ways like technology organizations want to be like, we have implemented these 5 technologies. Like we have a service mesh and we have a container strategy and we have a software defined networking strategy. Right. And frankly, you know, those are all good things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the art is blending that collectively with our customers into the real story and keep the main thing, which is like, what are we really accomplishing together?
Bang on.
And Raghu has been really excellent at saying like, actually the application transformation is where the industry's at today.
I so agreed.
There's so much that has been put into the infrastructure. There's so many different infrastructure services. There's cloud, there's serverless, there's all these great infrastructure innovations.
Yeah.
But what's really happening, and I think this is where Ian Meal was before, like the application portfolio transformation, a lot of these large organizations is still touching the first 5 or 10%.
Yep.
And so I think part of the question is like, how do we actually as an industry motivate and articulate the transformation of the rest of the portfolio or the obsolescence of it to something new? I think that's kind of where the industry is at right now.
Yeah.
Is really rationalizing the other 95% or 90%.
Yeah. Yeah. So agreed. So agreed. I feel you. Yep.
If I could jump in, the thing I've become obsessed with recently is this concept of moving people around the organization as a counter to that siloing. So if you have a large organization, you have silos for very, very good reasons, because you need areas of responsibility around things. You need specialism and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But the real problem comes, and if I can anecdotalize a little bit here, I was working in the infrastructure part of this big organization, and I would have dev teams come and show me. They'd say, we got this great thing called Kubernetes, and I've got it running on my laptop, and isn't it amazing? I can do all these things, and why don't you do that for us? And we would kind of like our palms would hit our foreheads, and we'd say like, we are doing that, but you have no idea how hard it is to get this stuff through the organization.
Yeah.
But if they'd sat in our team for 6 months on a secondment or whatever, they would immediately understand, okay, the real challenge is here. And if we want to make this happen, and I would love to have gone and worked for the security organization for 6 months and sat in their shoes. This whole concept of sitting in others' shoes is central to DevOps. And I think it's central to transformation. There seems to have been a loss in the last 50 years of this culture of the tour of duty. You used to go and work at like a Shell or somewhere like that, and you would be if you were groomed for greatness, you'd be working in 6 or 7 different parts of the business, so you could get a rounded view. Then you would go and run the business, but you wouldn't be going like, oh, those security guys, they do nothing. You would go like, okay, this is what the security guys care about. I need to give them this. This is what the infrastructure guys care about. This, I need to give them this.
Yeah.
And that's how you got change going. And we've lost that, I think. I don't know why.
Already in the 1960s, Peter Drucker was talking about the urge to balance entrepreneurship with conservation, and all managers must strike it. How many managers do we cross paths with who have got no idea about the entrepreneurial side of their actual job? And the business cycles, the earnings reports have driven change and transformation out of organizations as a muscle. And if you run the numbers and look at the cost of innovation, the cheapest way to innovate is to let somebody else do it and then buy them.
Right.
That's both rational and logical. But talking to about innovation and transformation with many executives, you might as well be speaking about a chicken farm to a greengrocer.
And the yeah, and it's interesting because the observation is they look at it immediately in terms of TCO. One of the first things they'll cut is the innovation. Okay, VMware does not do that, is my observation, but they'll cut at the innovation. And then in terms of TCO, they'll look at it as let's take on automation, but let's reduce headcount. So we're taking on the automation, but we'll reduce the headcount. Yeah, is what a lot of the larger organizations are tending to do.
We're going to shift gears in a minute to security, but just my answer to your question quickly is in Ian and in our work at Container Solutions, big organizations won't go unless they're gun at the head. Everybody can innovate when they're going to die. And we only engage with the C-level. So we work with teams, we work with middle managers, but
Beautiful.
we can't do our job unless we've got the C-suite on board.
Yep.
Cloud native is not a human resource system. You don't plan it with milestones and you don't drive it through a hierarchy. Change suggests swapping one thing out and putting it in another. Transformation suggests something utterly different. And that means changing your mind. And for middle-aged men in the 50s, that can be hard. Right, we are going to shift gears. James, we're going to talk about DevSecOps. What have you got here?
Here's what I'm seeing. I think prediction is that build packs and the build pack model for large organizations could be a critical breakthrough in terms of helping enable more of a DevSecOps model. I've seen, that's one of the things that came out of the Cloud Foundry community, which we borrowed from Heroku, right? Like everything is a string of borrowing. And what we saw is that very large organizations, the idea that the developer had nothing to do with building the container or updating a lot of the application dependencies in the container was a critical security step versus saying a developer built or a bespoke built, an artisan Docker file. And I think this is something that the industry really needs to take a long look at. I had one conversation with a CISO where they were trying to put in everything as sort of like a container scan. So what would happen is the developers would have their Jenkins jobs or whatever they were using to build their containers. They'd probably miss something. There'd be a security alert, and then it gets in the pipeline. Alert, stop, ticket, And so you go from this agile organization to actually sort of automate to ITIL. And I think build packs, we have clients using them on every variety of Kubernetes right now, a build service. It's also been adopted by Google Anthos, so it's not something exclusive to Tanzu. And the new Azure Spring Cloud service uses the K-Pack and the build pack model. And the difference is that the developer just changes things in Git, and then automatically that container is built in a new secure version anytime there's a vulnerability comes down or anytime a new app version is deployed. I think this is a very necessary step for scaling containers in enterprises. And I think we only did it the other way because the original kind of Docker laptop experience wasn't oriented around enterprise pipelines and DevSecOps. So that's my posit. It's got strong momentum. I'm curious what you're seeing around build packs.
I think I'm going to bring Ian Crosby in, our CTO, not because he's shy, but I know nothing about build packs. So this is when I bring in somebody who might know something. Are you doing that to me, James, or is there somebody behind your computer?
Oh, I'm saying keep an eye on it. Keep an eye on it. I guess it's something to watch.
But yeah. What's our take on that? CSs or any other guests? Nobody? We don't have a position on this, Ian? Any Ian? There's two Ians from CS here tonight.
I'll jump in for a second. Oh, go on, Ian.
Yeah, Adrian, you're upside down, mate.
Oh, am I?
Do you do this on purpose? Wow, like seriously, wow.
He's in Australia right now.
It's not a cat.
I can't even see my camera. Yeah, I don't. What I was going to say was one thing about build packs. It starts to get into software bill of materials. And I think we're going to see that kind of thing becoming exceptionally important in the next few years, because that's the kind of way that will prevent a lot of sort of attacks that we've seen recently, like the SolarWinds and so on. People are going to be a lot more wary and aware of what goes into their containers, their VMs, and where that came from. And to do that, you need to start getting into concepts like software bill of materials.
Yeah, I think having an explicit bill of materials is one of the free byproducts of having a build pack model, right? It's a very explicit enterprise managed bill of materials. I can't believe how many organizations still use sort of like, oh, I might have pulled that from Docker Hub. and it might pass a scan and get production. That is YOLO ops. That's the only way I would describe that. So it was interesting to me, Adrian, because what happened was there was a CISO that was trying to get DevSecOps right. And as we unpacked it, a lot of the scans were like these non-value add alerts, like they could have been stopped higher in the chain. So I think you always want to have security scans later in the pipeline, but you need to shift that left. I mean, shift left is not a weird idea. The idea is you want to shift the security monitoring as far left as you can to the point of it just being automated into the container build. Now, whether you use a build pack or whatever for that, I think build pack is the community's direction there. But that needs to happen because the later you catch it in the pipeline, the more back to a stepwise ITIL I think you're trending towards.
Yeah, and that gets into, absolutely where like companies like Sneak are heading and Docker themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, Sneak is even saying upstream of the build pack are there libraries you're using in your app, not even your container app environment. They're even taking it that far left. So I think something like a Sneak plus a build pack is the direction.
That would be like using some more or less signed libraries or signed containers all the way through, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, that's a great example of you're taking the secured, everything from the application libraries down has been secured and updated for you, as opposed to hand composing those, Maxim. That's right.
Oh, yeah, I have my containers signed on Docker Hub, but I don't think that many big organizations do that. So, and I talked to Nathan from Docker Hub Security, how sort of they made it reasonably easy to sign the containers, but I still haven't seen the wider adoption, let's say, the same level as SSL certificates, for example, how you sign the code. People tend to trust SSL certificates, but they're not aware of that concept that you can actually have a crypto signature on your binary artifact, and that you actually should daisy chain the entire thing if you want to be absolutely certain.
Yeah, and I think you'll see Tanzu focus on that, what we call the secure software supply chain, and everything signed end-to-end cryptographically. We got a lot of work going on in that right now. Yeah. But I just think that the simple thing for everyone to do is start looking at the build pack model today and stop thinking, because this is another example of sometimes where the companies have a sales-driven architecture. So someone from like a container security company might say it's all about just scanning the container and not actually solve your problem and shift it left. That's kind of my 2 cents.
I mean, I don't want to give grief to all the wonderful software vendors who might be here today, but what we say to our customers is, of course, they're telling you that that thing's going to work here because they get incentivized on selling licenses. So, yeah, I don't know when as buyers, we're going to latch onto this. I mean, the amount of pre-sales meetings we do where the buyer is just about to buy a load of tools, millions and millions, and we say, what are you going to do that for? Do you know anybody who knows how to build a containerized application? And yeah, they've got an axe in the game, right? They've got an axe in the game.
Yeah, and it's all good. It's all goodness. I'm just sharing my perspective and how I try to help people see kind of like where that's a good fit and where they can solve that more systematically with something like a build service.
No, but exactly, I know what you mean. But it's what you say about the image scanning. An image scanner will not make you cloud native or secure.
Well, and if it's going off every second because the developer isn't updating their like, the alerting cacophony is a problem. So
right, we've got another question coming in now, James. I think this is a good one because it's taking an operator point of view. Oh no, I've lost it now. 1 second. I've lost the question. Oh, sorry. Let me find a different one.
Sure.
Oh, here's an interesting one. Can we run Kubernetes in VMware without Tanzu? Technical question.
Yes.
Short answer?
I mean, yeah. I mean, of course. VMware is the most ubiquitous virtualization software in the world. It runs, in my inbox are a lot of people running Rancher, OpenShift, open source Kubernetes. We actually have a team under Kit Colbert's, kind of vSphere team that tests and validates a lot of those different Kubernetes distros on VMware. So that's all supported and tested and goodness. I think the thing that we're doing that is pretty profound, though, is we're starting to just bake the Kubernetes API into vSphere, because again, we want to just make it a simple declarative object that you call, like, hey, I need a cluster, hey, I need a container, and it shouldn't take a DevOps miracle to stand that up. And I think that's where we're going. And what I'm so excited about, you know, with some of the work we're doing with vSphere 7 is just Kubernetes is there. Now let's get to work on cloud native. And I think that's a little bit different in an evolution of where the market was 5 years ago, where just standing up Kubernetes was an 18-month project. So, you know, if you can get the Kubernetes just from vSphere, party on, I say. I think that's a great place. But we have 1,300 engineers working on Tanzu, and it's not just baking Kubernetes into vSphere. It's really then to the point of this conversation, like, okay, what do we do with the DevX above that? What do we do with Postgres on Kubernetes to optimize that for organizations to run databases on Kubernetes? How do we keep Spring evolving along with the Kubernetes ecosystem so that the way you configure Spring and do service discovery is aligned with Kubernetes? Like, we've got a lot of work to do just above that base layer. So I don't know if that answered the question.
I'm pretty sure it does. Okay, this is a two-part question. How does the architecture of Tanzu differ from Kubernetes? And specifically, what kind of opportunities do admins get in the Tanzu environment? I think this question is from an operator who wants to know, or an admin, what power are you going to give me?
I think you know, Tanzu is very community aligned in terms of how it thinks about automation. And I'll go back to cluster API. When you look at how vSphere 7 Kubernetes works and how Tanzu Kubernetes Grid works on public cloud, it has this supervisor cluster pattern where you put down a base cluster. And this is very much like your history with the Mesos environment, right? People for a while said like, oh, lay down Mesos and then run Kubernetes on top of it. Like that was sort of like a use case people thought of. And I think what's happened with cluster API is they've said, lay down a supervisor cluster, and then you can declaratively automate Kubernetes above it. And that's very much how operators should learn to run Kubernetes in my ideal, because that's how vSphere 7 Kubernetes works. That's how Tanzu on AWS works. That's how Tanzu in Azure works. And it's a very community aligned thing. So you can go sit in the SIG around cluster API, get the latest and greatest that's happening there, and then expect to see those as first-class objects within Tanzu. So I think stay close to the community and cluster API, and you'll be close to Tanzu. And that just comes from the fact that the creators of Tanzu's Kubernetes distribution are the creators of Kubernetes itself and the community.
And do you cross paths with the team from Heptio much, James, in your day-to-day work?
Of course, yeah, they're my peers on the leadership team, and that's what I mean. What's so cool is that you've got the three things that I think to make cloud native work well in the enterprises together: the apps, the developer experience, and the container layer. That is the leadership team of Tanzu. That's what we work on.
Very cool. Very exciting times for you at VMware right now then.
It's pretty good. It's a good ride. Ooh. So looking forward to working with you and your organization more closely.
Oh, you should definitely work with us. We're awesome. There was a terrible rumor going around that Container Solutions was going to acquire VMware, and I was like, no. There's, they're too small for us. But let's keep, you never know.
Any good CEO always blusters about buying the biggest company in the market. Yeah.
Oh, is that right? Oh, dear me. Oh, shit. I didn't know that was a thing. Oh, I'm so embarrassed now.
No.
Okay, we've got questions coming in about your competitors. I think this is it probably a question on people's minds. How do you compare to people like Rancher and OpenShift?
I'm probably not the best person to answer that in detail. Like, I'm not an expert in those products. I haven't run them in production. I think we just really are focused on what matters to us is removing the complexity of standing up, running, and coordinating and orchestrating Kubernetes everywhere, and then making people effective on top of it. And I think we're just laser focused on that. And I think the opportunity we have with all of the assets I mentioned, I think gives us a lot of differentiation, even before you get into what I see as CIOs coming around and saying, I get it. You've got both the holistic story and you've got this incredible opportunity to reduce complexity because you're community aligned and you're vSphere aligned. I think that's just a very simple prima facie, like why Tanzu was a game changer in the market without even getting as specific in the competition. Those are the high level themes that click in for the leaders that bet on us. And I think the 1,300 then of the best engineers in the world betting on that as well, they go on the journey. So I think it's a big market. There's lots of room, but every day in the people that are sort of not all in on one public cloud, that's really where Tanzu becomes very meaningful. And then even Azure has started to bake Spring Boot directly into Azure. There's something called the Azure Spring Cloud Service, where they've said Spring Boot is the Java microservices pattern, just like Adrian Cockcroft knew in 2014. We're going to bake that as a first-class object into Azure.
It's very cool, very cool. Actually, now you're talking about cloud providers, what about hybrid solutions or hybrid application development? This is a theme in the webinars, and a lot of people are concerned about that. For example, European companies don't want to be locked into one cloud. So what is your view on hybrid application deployments, not just on different data centers in different clouds, but also along the edge as well?
That's a great point. The first thing, so I just got off a prep call to talk to a CIO, and they were exploring some public cloud, but on that public cloud, they had high latency back to their data in their core data center. So the number of apps they could really do there in a very agile way was limited. But they were using Tanzu, so they're actually running around 25,000 containers in production already in their data center on vSphere, very effectively. What I see sometimes is people, they miss the play that cloud native is a software architecture and a culture. It is not necessarily public cloud. And so what happens is they might only prioritize doing modern applications just on that public cloud, and then realize that they don't have the data there, they don't have the operating capability, and they're not maturity. And then they get stuck at what you might call like that first 5% problem. So they're able to go do 5% there, but not the other 95. So hopefully, the opportunity that we see is twofold. Number one is that your software architecture should be wherever you want it to be. Like before you even buy into the kind of like the bluster arguments about multi-cloud or not, it's a question of, can your software architecture go wherever you want? Like, are you in control of that? And with a hybrid design with Tanzu, the answer is yes. You want to declaratively operate us on Azure? Yes. You want to declaratively operate us on AWS? Yes. You want to declaratively operate us on vSphere? Yes. And I think that's just that's a breath of fresh air in some regards. I think the things that are harder to make multi-cloud are more of like data analytics. Like if you look at like Snowflake and BigQuery, you sort of marry where you put your terabytes of data, or your petabytes of data. But your software delivery architecture, I think, is more naturally multi-cloud. And I think it's really important to do that. Otherwise, you're not really addressing that full 90% left of your portfolio of apps. I don't know if that makes sense to your experience, but I really think that your software delivery architecture should be innately multi-cloud.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Right, audience, how are we getting on?
We're getting great. One question here, since you mentioned BigQuery and competitors, how would you compare it with Google Anthos? What's your take on that, James? Because I see a lot of similarities.
Yeah, I'm not an Anthos expert, right? So don't let me opine about them. I know the Anthos team, they're a block away from me here in San Francisco, one of their offices. So I see some of them walk by me on the way to the supermarket. But I think, I think back to our advantages, are you running it at a hybrid location where you want to run it on vSphere or you want to run it on a different public cloud? Do you trust us as VMware, which is the most proven software infrastructure company in the world that runs on any hardware already, to take you there? Yes or no? A lot of people are saying yes to us in the data center or another public cloud. I think Google's credible if you're saying I'm all in on Google Cloud and I'm a startup and I'm just going there. I think they're doing really well, like Google and Google Container Engine. I'll give you a use case where I wouldn't fight them. I think some of the gaming companies that are using GKE and SpannerDB, and they're all in, greenfield gaming companies, and they really need that multi-region data model of Spanner. That sounds like a really good all-in on Google use case. I think for enterprises that want to run on any cloud and have a lot of mixed environments, I think VMware is almost inarguably the at-scale software infrastructure company that they count on. So I think that's kind of how I look at the market today.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Is VMware the sleeping giant of the Kubernetes world?
I think
James?
so. That's why I'm excited. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm really into cloud software. Like, I think cloud services are cool, but I think software is the profound binding language of our industry, right? Like once our industry agrees on a software layer, that is the binding language that we build the community, the tribe, the innovation. And that's where magically you start being able to do things you never thought were possible because we've all agreed in that common language of software. And so while I think the economic incentives sometimes tilt towards just the SaaS model, I always have loved to participate in the open software communities because I think that's where this big change can come from. I mean, all Amazon is a collection of those previously agreed upon binding languages of software and open source. So I'd like us to be the sleeping giant, Ian, and I appreciate any advice along the way.
We know something about sleeping, that's for sure. Does anybody want to come in on that? Are VMware the sleeping giant? I mean, the way you've spoken this morning for you and this evening for me, I mean, it certainly seems like you're doing some pretty compelling stuff. And obviously on the business side, you must have a massive Rolodex of customers who are just ready for this stuff from you right now.
I'm taking Zooms 12 hours a day.
Right.
Like just, you know, like on a personal level, like 10, 12 hours a day on Zoom, sharing some of these ideas, getting feedback, 1,300 engineers working on this, a lot of excitement. I think that, you know, respectfully, the salespeople from public cloud are also very powerful. But I think we have enough experience to help people start to digest the, oh, I should just be all in on X public cloud message into kind of a hybrid software solution. And I think that's kind of, you know, like the point of creative tension in the market right now is just like all in on one public cloud versus really thinking of this broader community.
Yeah. You've got to think about this. You just got to pause for 1 second. It's currently 2021. Netflix was founded in 1996, the same year that Kent Beck was working on the Chrysler project, the C3 project, where he invented extreme programming. XP as a method only worked because of the internet. Before that, we used to ship CDs and floppy disks. Now, fast forward 10 years, 2006, we've got our first utility computing service from Amazon. Within 20 years, look at what we've done. Because, I mean, it's absolutely bananas. The applications we create now are not game changing, they're planet changing. So if you just replay what you've just been saying, right, and then try to go back, when we used to build our software, talking about Java back in 2002, the build used to take 20 minutes, which was quick. And we used to go and drink coffee and actually speak to each other. This has changed radically. And I think we're all part of that movement. So I'm not surprised you're excited. And the competitive tension is important, right? It keeps us all moving and thinking.
It is. And I think this tension between pure hosted and the community driven software innovation, the common language of software, is a good creative tension to have. And you're totally right. Like, I'll just a quick old person anecdote. My first computer company I worked at was Sun Microsystems, which I was very proud of getting a job there. Yeah. And I remember saying like, oh my gosh, I work at a company that makes everything from chips to the Java. This is incredible. And it was like a university. But my first actual assignment was learning with a customer who was spending 6 weeks deciding what size of servers to buy for the app. So this is where we were in 2000, like Sun engaged with its customers with the 6 to 8 week server sizing assessment. Yeah. And now we're at like declarative scaling. Like crazy. We used to spend 6 weeks on a paid engagement to pick each server for each app.
Yeah. We used to, when I built KLM's web services infrastructure, I was only a young person at the time, a young man. It was brilliant for me. If we wanted to performance test our Java apps, against, you know, what would happen if 1,000 people wanted to book a flight? You'd have to book a slot on a test server, fill in a bit of paper, tell them what Java you wanted, tell them all the configuration. 6 weeks later, you got your slot. And then if your test failed, you'd have to book another slot. So you had a 12-week cycle on a simple performance test. This was already in the noughties. Yeah.
I wondered how long it would take before we got the Java stories.
Sorry. He started it. He started it. He started Spring Boot, Java, Big Java. He started it.
Java's incredible. It just keeps going. Like it's like you can't stop it. It's because it's an ecosystem. It is a common language. It is how the world reasons about some of these problems. Even if there's a hipster idea that comes along, Java has been the enduring common language in ecosystems.
Well, when we graduated, Ian, 20 odd years ago and came into the world of work, COBOL was the big legacy, and there was more lines of it because it's a more verbose language. And at university, also in 1996, very important year, there was the first time Java was being taught, and Java was the hip new language. And if you'd have said, if you'd have gone back and said Java will be the new legacy in 20 years' time, nobody would have believed you.
Someone's saying,
yeah,
I was like, yeah, that runs on a JVM.
it's pretty verbose, Jamie, I have to say.
Java's pretty verbose, yeah.
I won't get into language debates.
Public static main void. I think that's
Netflix does okay with it, and Amazon Web Services is one of the biggest downloaders of Spring Boot that there is. Like we can watch, we have a rough approximation of some of the IP ranges of where people are pulling this stuff from, and I believe that Amazon uses an awful lot of Spring Boot to build the cloud.
For sure they do. Hey, we've got an actual question coming in, which is related. You've recently acquired Mesh 7. Congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Is it going to be added to Tanzu?
Yeah, I worked on that. So me and Perry Monculus, who is the CTO of the NSBU, acquired this. We signed a definitive agreement to acquire Mesh 7. So it is not closed. So forward-looking statements, don't let me break into forward-looking statement trouble. The definitive agreement has come out to acquire Mesh 7. Here's what's cool about Mesh 7. It basically is a sort of breakthrough DevSecOps observability tool where a lot of service meshes, you have to put everything into them. You have to tell them everything that you want. You're going to give them all the instructions about how the services should be connected. What Mesh 7 does is it says, give me any sidecar Envoy proxy or give me any set of application networking in a service mesh, and I'll tell you what APIs are there. I'll tell you if the APIs have any anomalies in them. I'll auto-discovery the schema. And so it really starts to solve one of those problems I talked about, which is bringing the dev team and the ops team and the security team together without any conversations. And then you can say, well, now that I know what all the normal behaviors of an API on a service mesh should be, how could I have Mesh 7 alert me if that changes? And how could I apply policy on some of those interactions? So it's really a breakthrough. It's going to be integrated into Tanzu Service Mesh and bring a whole new suite of DevSecOps observability and security tools to it. So tune in on that one. I think we'll have much more to say once the definitive agreement becomes an acquisition.
Right, we really are in the last few minutes of the webinar. We've managed to hold the crowd. We started off with, we've lost a few people, but often it's because people have got meetings because it's more than 90 minutes. So we get messages saying, oh, I've got to drop out, I'm really sorry. So we've lost a few people, but it's only because they're in new meetings. So we're doing well. Does anybody or somebody saying, Daniel Vaughan, hello Daniel, you're cooking your dinner now. Please don't set fire to your house. Daniel asked a question earlier and I asked Daniel, do you want me to ask or will you ask? He sent me a message saying, I'm cooking, mate. Would you mind asking for me? I don't know, Daniel. This is just how it rolls on our webinars. This is a question. When running Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes, I think this will be our last technical question, James. When running Cloud Foundry on Kubernetes on Tanzu, how long do you think the window is to get adoption before something Knative++ provides a realistic alternative to the Cloud Foundry experience?
Yeah, I think it very much depends on where you're at and your overall adoption. I think there's kind of three kinds of customers that I would look at there very quickly. One is the at-scale Cloud Foundry users. These are the people running 10,000 plus containers on Cloud Foundry Tanzu application service very successfully. One of the great things that Cloud Foundry did is it really simplified a lot of the operating experience. So there are not snowflake Cloud Foundry deployments. Like if it got one thing right, it's not a snowflake. So it came with one operating system. It came with one way of updating that operating system. It came with one application ingress, right? Like how many ingresses are there in Kubernetes? Cloud Foundry had one. It was called the Go router, basically one. And so that level of opinion at scale is a remarkable economic weapon for our customers, not because of technical superiority, but because it comes with innate alignment. It's already aligned in terms of those set of opinions, and it's proven to run at, they say 1.5 million containers in production right now on it. So for the customers that are already at scale on that well-integrated model, we're extending a long-term support and update engineering roadmap to keep adding features to that fully integrated solution out till as long as anyone can imagine in software, about 5 or 6 years. So stay on that. And then 2, if you're just adopting Kubernetes and you're not a Cloud Foundry user today, I do think starting to look at some of the Knative innovation that's happening and where we're going is the right path to go on if you've got a greenfield architecture. But I'm working every day to make sure we bring some of those strong opinions from the Cloud Foundry world to that new Knative on Kubernetes environment. And 2 examples of that would be additional architecture and logic to help Spring apps run best on Knative. We're working on that, stay tuned. And the other is like Tanzu starting to embed an OS in the same way that Cloud Foundry had an embedded OS. You know, I'll leave you on this. How many operating system varieties should an organization undergoing cloud native transformation have? How many different flavors of OS are value add to an organization? I talked to one car maker in Germany. They said, we have 620 different .release versions, different OSs floating around. And I said, by and large, you know how many organizations like Google have? And it's eventually consistent. It's undergoing upgrades all the time, but it's basically eventually consistent to 1. And the point is that you don't want to have non-value add complexity. And that's back to like project-based versus platform-based. So I think just having like a single OS, regardless of what it is an important step to take too. So anyway, that's a long answer, but stay tuned.
I think that's a great answer. And I think on that note, we have run out of time. And so unfortunately, we're very sorry there's no more time for any questions or any extra questions. You can follow James on Twitter. What's your hash tag again, James?
Last name, first name, Waters James.
Waters James. You can follow James on Twitter. You can follow Ian Mile as well. He went viral the other week by he was getting abused by his teenage son, and he reported that and it became a viral tweet. We had more traffic to the website that day than any day ever. So well done. But you can follow James. And I think that really only leaves me. You need to unmute your microphones, people, because you know what's going to happen now. My first thanks is to Ian Mile for his contributions and his gossip. Round of applause. Keep it going, everybody. Thank you very much to Leanne, to Adrian. Thank you very much to Barbara and all the other people who asked questions. But the biggest thank you, the biggest round of applause is for James from VMware for coming in, entertaining us, educating us, and being an all-round good egg in helping us put this webinar together. James, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. It's so fun. Thank you.
Our pleasure. And we will see you all next time. Look out for updates on Twitter. And James, see you next time. Thanks, Carla. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.